All right, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. I kind of want to give you guys just some clarity about what we've spoken so far and how the two talks relate. Last night we talked about different perspectives of how people saw the cross. When they saw Jesus on the cross, some people mocked him and they said, oh, that's weakness. And that's something that was despised and people want to have nothing to do with. They want to have nothing to do with the cross. They want to have nothing to do with this concept of death. And so they mock the cross. And there's other people who maybe a lot of us can relate. We said, we fear the cross. Like the cross is not something easy. And a lot of us don't know what's on the other side of the cross. And so here I am trying to tell you just to be miserable. And you say, okay, sign me up. like who wants that? Who wants that? So you don't understand what's on the other side of the cross, and so there's a fear. And then there's the people that love the cross. We said that Christ is the one who loves the cross. And so this morning when I was speaking about the temptation that comes from the devil, is that because the devil knows that he wants to take away the real power that is in you. I want you to just take a step back, and I don't think a lot of us understand what the spiritual life is about. A lot of us think, isn't it just God like washes our sins and like that's it? Like we go to heaven and we're all good from there? No. You see, God gave us commandments because God wanted something way more out of us. He wanted us to be as powerful as Him. That everything you do, you have the power of influence. And you have the power to change. And you have the power to, literally what the Bible described the disciples as, those who turn the world upside down. So Christ gave you this amazing potential. And now, it's become something so foreign to Christianity. Like, we don't get it. Like, we don't see, like, we have to talk about saints that lived 1,700 years ago because where is that power? You're just telling me to like say no to everything fun and to live a miserable... Like, what is the goal of this? Isn't it just so that I go to heaven one day, like I make sure that my sins are washed, Jesus pays the ticket, gets me in, it's happily ever after? If you have no intention, let me get everyone's attention. If you have no intention of walking with Christ on this earth, in the way that He intended for you to be. And if you just look, don't worry about like your neighbors, your friends, look at yourself. You say, I wonder what Christ intended for me to be. What is this greatness of a life that God intended for me that I'm just kind of like going through the motions? Like, I go to school, I have friends, we take a meeting every once in a while, I go to a retreat, have fun, it's nice. That is nothing. That is nothing compared to what was meant for the believers. And if the believers had this life in them, and this power in them, the whole world would be a whole different place. But because we, the source of power, or the example, or the icon of power, aren't that special, people are like, I'm not going that way. Christians are a bunch of just like judgmental, like bigots who just like, they're Pharisees, they don't care about anybody, they think they're the only ones going to heaven. Like, Christians are just like whatever. Until people can see the Christians and see them in a different light, everyone is going to perish. Everyone is going to perish. And everyone, and I don't mean everyone, I mean like, we're not on the path. Why? Because I have no intention of walking with Christ with a daily experience with Him. It's just like, okay, Lord, like you're there, I'm here, you be nice, I'll be nice, and everything's good. But that's not what was intended. If you've ever lived in like, if you've ever been to like the third world, maybe not in Egypt, but if anybody's ever been to Africa, maybe, anybody ever live in Zambia, maybe once in their life? Okay. So as we would do, when we would go to Africa, because the third world, death is something very normal. Death is actually like, we were going to funerals in Kenya, like when I was living there. we would go to 2 or 3 funerals a day. Like it was just like, okay, I have a liturgy, and then I have a few funerals, and then we're gonna go, eat, and then a funeral, and then we're gonna go eat. Like there was just like part of like it was like the ekbaya, kind of like you go to a funeral and you eat. That's what you do every day. Death was so common, especially because of HIV and malaria and whatever. The death wasn't so much like a foreign concept to them. To us, on the other hand, it's foreign. Which is why everybody here, like in Egypt, right? Because it's like everybody's making jokes about the coronavirus. It's like a bunch of gifs that are coming on, like Instagram. It's just they're just making a joke out of it because death to them is like it happens. Death happens. In America, because death is so foreign to us, coronavirus, like everybody's going crazy. Like nobody knows what to do and what's going to happen. And I can't do this and I can't wear this and don't come next to me. And I saw a funny gif yesterday. So there's a bunch of people waiting at a bus stop, and a lady, like she sneezes out like everybody waiting, and the guy just pulls out a gun and shoots her. like automatic knee-jerk reaction was like, okay, just shoot her, and then everybody started spraying like Lysol in the middle of the air. And I was like dying. I'm like, this is America. This is like I'll shoot you if you sneeze on me, man. Like. Death to us is so foreign. This concept of death is like we live, like the mortality rate. People live till you're 90 years, like old. If God gives you a long life, In Africa, you're like, wow, he's old. He's 50. Like, it's a big deal. I'm not joking. It's actually a reality. In some of the villages, you see like they call him like Mzee. Like he's like the elder if he's like 60. Like he's 60, like he's the elder of the village. Why? Because death was something that wasn't very foreign to them, and it was very common. You see, this current generation doesn't get what it means. What we want to do is we want to move. When I talk about death, I have a hard job that I have to do. I have to rebrand it. I have a hard task to do to rebrand this idea of death. To you, death stinks. Death sounds like misery. But if I can show you the power of death, you'll be like, I'll explain it later. You'll feel like, okay, no, I want that. I'm not talking about physical death. I want to make that clear. When I say death, I don't mean like physical death. I mean like a death to yourself, your ego, your pride, everything that fights against spiritual things. Rebranding death isn't like within my power to do, but it's something that I'm going to try to do to show you that death is the new life and that this is the goal of the retreat. After Christ's resurrection, we have to look at God's Spirit dwelling in you like a piñata, okay? I want you to imagine like a piñata. You guys ever get to play piñata at like birthday parties, okay? You guys understand that. I do with my kids. So like the only way the good stuff comes out is what? You gotta beat it, right? When it's broken is when the good stuff comes out. Well, this is what St. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7. St. Paul says, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. What is he saying? He says, you are an earthen vessel. It's like a clay pot. And he says, the excellence of the power of God is in this clay pot. How do you get the power out? Do you guys know? The only way to get it out is by doing what? By breaking it. This clay pot that has this treasure is breakable. Okay? And you have to understand that you God's power is in you, and St. Paul says it's in an earthen vessel or a clay vessel. The only way God's power will be coming out in your life is if this vessel, which is you, and your pride, and your ego, is broken. When you look at the saints, and you look at people that are turning the world upside down, these are people that accepted some struggle. This nun that I was describing yesterday that works at this like handicapped home. She was powerful, and I'll tell you this amazing story that she told us after. She said, it was like a house for the handicapped, like I described yesterday. And they would have people that were sick, like they had cancer or whatever. They would come and live in this house. Well, one lady, she was a little bit higher class. She came into the house and she saw all these handicapped children. And she's like, la, I'm not going to stay here. I'm not going to stay in this place. It's not nice. And then she went to the bathroom. On her way out, she went to the bathroom. And she saw Christ sitting on a wheelchair. And Christ was giving her the look of rebuke. Like disappointment. Like, you don't want to stay in this house. And this is where I'm going to be. And it was Christ sitting on a wheelchair. And the lady came out of the bathroom. She's like, I'm never leaving here. And what she discovered was that this Tassoni, who is like dying every day to take care of these people, life is oozing through the place. Christ is saying, I'm here. This is where miracles are going to happen. This is where you're going to see God face to face. And this woman who had cancer and she was going to, spend some time as she was getting her treatment, being taken care of in this house. She said, no, I don't want to stay with all these handicapped kids. And so she was like, too good to be there. And she said, no, Christ is here. Christ is here where there is this brokenness. If life is on the inside, there's everything to be gained by having our lives turned inside out. 2 Corinthians 4:16-17 says this, therefore we do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man... So the outward man is what? Do you guys know what the outward man is? What is it?
The flesh.
Yeah, the flesh, like us. It's perishing. The inward man, which is what?
Spirit.
Very good. Like when you're baptized, you get an inward man. You get this inside guy that leads you and speaks to you in your conscience and tells you the difference between right and wrong. The inward man is being renewed day by day. For our light affliction, our struggles, which is but for a moment. Who's saying this verse? Do you guys know who wrote Corinthians? St. Paul says, for our light affliction. What was St. Paul's light affliction? Do you guys know what he was? My favorite chapter in the whole Bible. St. Paul was a beast. Okay, listen to this. Listen to this. He says, he says, in labors abundant, in stripes, meaning he was striped with like whips, above measure, like there's no counting. In prisons more frequently, in deaths often, like almost dead. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked, a night and a day I have been in the deep, like in the ocean. In journeys often, in perils or dangers of water, in dangers of robbers, in dangers of my own countrymen, in dangers of the Gentiles, in dangers in the city, in dangers in the wilderness, in dangers in the city, in dangers among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and in nakedness. He says, for our light affliction is but for a moment. You're like, yes, it is. Like, what? Like these guys found a bug, like crawling on their socks. They were like, you say, like St. Paul, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, okay, after the first shipwreck, you're like, okay, that's enough. Or after the first stoning, okay, I was stoned like, 40 times, how many times was stoned? You're like, okay, that's enough. Okay, God, I did my thing. Like, let's go. St. Paul was a crazy man. He was a crazy man because he discovered something that I witnessed in a spiritual father who I served with, who he would feed off of suffering. He would feed off of I'll never forget, we got to one time to Tanzania. We were serving in Tanzania. Tanzania is a very, very poor country. And every time we went there, so you hear people screaming at night, the witchcraft people are being killed and eaten. I don't know what they're doing. But like, honestly, no, it's like freaky. At night you just hear screams, like women screaming, like they're being choked to death, like all night. It's freaky. It's an Islamic place. There's a lot of magic. It's a scary place. And every time we go there, like the people don't show up. They're not into the church. And I told Sayyidina, I'm like, Sayyidina, khalas, like close. So I went in 98. We built I was there when we built the house or whatever. And then I went in 2008. So after 10 years, it's still just like falling apart. I'm like, Sayyidina, close this down. Like we have other services and other churches, like close down Tanzania. And he said, this is where I learned to be on my knees. He says, this is where I see the miracles of God. I'm like, Sayyidina, these people are like miserable. They would threaten us. I remember one time I woke up in the morning. I think I told you guys. I woke up in the morning. There's a bunch of guys with machetes, like at the fence, and they're like, and the guard is like, Bishop, he's screaming, Bishop, wake up! And I'm like, what's going on? I come out. I'm like in my underwear. I'm like, what's wrong? It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. There's like 100 men with machetes waiting at the fence, like they're gonna take over the. I'm like. She's like, should I shoot them? I'm like, what do you mean shoot them? Like, he gave him like a bow and arrow. Like you're going to shoot one and then 1,000 are going to kill him. I'm like, no shooting. We called the bishop, and my point is that like every day there were trials. Now if you go to that place, you see the church is so powerful. Like everybody knows the Coptic church in that area. People, literally, they like fear the Coptic church. They say this is like the house of God. They fear it because they know this is where power is flowing. And as I would see, what I want you guys to think of is that every time you die to yourself, your pride, your own ego, like the decision of should I go to the party or not, and you say I'm not going to do it, and you feel a little bit of pain, I want you to know that it's an opportunity for massive power to flow through. For like life-changing power. That you can change everybody around you. You can make a difference in everybody around you. You could be the icon of Christ to so many on one condition. You have one opportunity to do it, and it's only through death to self. You say, well, I don't want that. But that's why Christ came. Like he wanted you to have that. That's why Christ, if you want to be a Christian, you want to be a follower of Christ, that's what you have to do. And if you don't want, then maybe Christianity is not for you. Because it's for the people that want to live for Christ and live with Christ and be united to Christ and be transformed by Christ and change the whole world upside down for Christ. But if that's not something that you care about, Christianity is going to stink. Right? Just some liturgies, some smoke, some candles, some uncomfortable bed. Like it's going to be nothing. Do you want to go through your whole life and be like, it's Christianity? We have long liturgies and, I got to spill my guts to Abuna and tell him all my sins. And, like, that's Christianity. Is that what it is? That's so cheap. The power is in earthen vessels. And the only way that power comes out is if you break it. St. Paul says this amazing thing. He says, death is working in me, but life is in you. The little deaths that you experience should lead to anticipation. Pay attention here. Every time you feel a death to your pride, a death because you are going to feel lonely, like you're the only one that didn't go out, you're the only one that is not smoking, you're the only one that is not doing whatever, that death that you feel, accept it in anticipation. Something is going to come out. You know the story of the woman that had an alabaster flask and she poured it on Christ? That alabaster flask, when she broke it, what happened? The good smelling aroma came out. And this is a symbol of when you are broken, when your flask is broken, that good smelling aroma and anointing of Jesus is going to come out. You are going to smell, I don't mean physically smell, like Christ in a way where like, and I'll tell you small ways that I've said. Even just a couple weeks ago, we were on a missionary trip in Egypt. A bunch of us, every time we get in the bus, we sing songs and we pray and, we're laughing, we're having fun. We had these two drivers, or they were on our bus. They were like police officers. They're assigned to our bus. Every time we go, they're Muslim police officers. And they have to go, usually the police in Egypt aren't the most liked people or the trusted people. There's corruption and they're bad people, some of them. And both of them, so we were there for like 10 days, and both of them, they said, Abuna, there's something different about you guys. He says, I love you guys. I said, why? He said, I've never seen anything like it. I said, what? He said, the love that is between you guys, and that you guys are like giving and sacrificing, walking in dirt and whatever. You guys are like these, people coming from America, and you're doing this, and I just see something. One of them came on top of the mountain of, we climbed St. Anthony's Mountain, and he just was going to do it for exercise. We got to the top of the mountain, and I remember telling the group, I said, everybody take 10 minutes, spend alone with Jesus. Spend time alone with God. It's quiet, it's beautiful, it's pretty. So I find him, he's over in the corner, he's like sitting with himself, kind of just like examining himself. And then one of the group took him inside St. Anthony's cave and began to pray with him. This is a non-Christian police officer. If anybody finds out he did this, he's a dead man. And he's kneeling, and he is standing before the altar in St. Anthony's cave. And he said, this is the most powerful experience of my life. Power. We were just being normal, just enjoying our Christian life together, praising God and serving, doing what God does through people. The next guy, he's like taking selfies with my kids, and I'm like, the police don't do that. They're supposed to be very strict, and they have rules or whatever. I took him into one of the monasteries where there's full bodies, like relics. They're from the 3rd century. They're still bleeding, like 1700 years later, okay? The relics are still bleeding, hair is still growing out of their skulls. I said, Ta'ala Shuf, come inside with me, come see. He's like, I can go inside the monastery? I said, yeah, come with me. This is another guy, this is a different guy. And he went and he said, Abuna, everything in you guys is different. He said, everything in you guys is different. At the end, we gave him a Bible. Again, to give a non-Christian in Egypt a Bible is like life-threatening. You don't do that. Because God's power was just flowing. We gave him a Bible, and he was so thankful. And he was like, he said, he took my phone number, and he's like, how amazing is it that when Christians are being what they're supposed to be, unintentionally, we weren't trying to preach this, we were just being ourselves. But God's power was flowing, because that's what the children of God are supposed to be. We're not supposed to be weak. We're not supposed to be foolish. So every time you experience some type of death, it's an opportunity for a resurrection. The Bible invites us to embrace this process of death. I'm going to get to what took place at the cross of Christ was something called a paradigm shift. You guys know what a paradigm shift is? It's like everything switches. Is that whenever there is suffering, there's life. Whenever there's suffering, there's joy. Doesn't make sense. It's a paradigm shift. Usually, if you celebrate, you have joy. No. If you suffer, you find life. If you suffer for Christ, more life is flowing. We have a loved one in our church that passed a month ago. Some of you know her. And I remember visiting her in the last week of her life. And as I spoke to her husband, he said, something was coming out of this woman. She said she was blessing everyone. She's on the bed suffering, every day getting worse, and she's blessing everyone. She's full of life, and she's encouraging them and praying for their families, and she's suffering. Life. You say it doesn't make sense. The person is on their deathbed, but the person is blessing and giving life to others. And the people got to see the power flowing through a suffering person. It's a paradigm shift. It doesn't make sense. That when I die for Christ, I remember when we were living in Kenya, I was hosting groups from all over the world. Australia and California and Canada. We were getting groups from everywhere. And people were coming and saying, we want to stay with you. I'm like, you're like in Australia. You have everything. And they're like, no, you have everything. I'm like, we live in a village. Our electricity gets cut out. Our water gets cut off. They said, there's just glory here. Every day we see the miracles of God. God is doing like miracles every day. And they said, for once we understood that this is what the Christian life is supposed to be. And people were coming. Why were they coming to the mission? Because they said, where it was difficult is where we got to see glory. And where life is just whatever, there's no glory. They say, we don't see this at home. I'm like, is it the poor? They said, no, it's not the poor. It's the power of God. I don't know how to describe it, but it's the power of God flowing through you. Not through the place. I'm going to read a story. Here it is. Follow this story and see if it's actually a medical condition that we're going to describe right now. It says, then he came, this is Jesus' inaugural address. Like imagine somebody's going to become the president or going to become the king. This is his inaugural address to the people of what like is going to be his new like presidency or kingship. It says, then he came to Bethsaida and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And when he was restored and saw everyone clearly, then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town nor tell anyone in the town. Now Jesus and his disciples went up to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, who do men say that I am? So he's not just saying, who do men say that I am? He's saying, who do men see me as? Like, what do they see Jesus as? So they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, others one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you see me as? Or say that I am? Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ. Then he strictly warned that they should tell no one about him. Follow along with me, guys. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly, then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. When he has called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What this man had was something called visual agnosia. Visual agnosia is this. The way that your eyes kind of receive light, there's like pathways. And apparently, people with visual agnosia, I'm not going to tell you like the whole scientific thing, but basically, the pathways split up. So when a person who has this condition sees, they see things like blobs of like blurriness. When Jesus healed him the first time, or he put his hand on him the first time, the person had visual agnosia. And so he says, what do you see? First he was blind. First the guy was blind. And then he touched him, and then he got visual agnosia, which means he sees a little bit. Then Jesus touched him again, and then he saw clearly. Why did Jesus heal him from the first time? Why didn't Jesus say, okay, be healed, and he sees perfectly? What he's trying to say is, I'll tell you when you can see me clearly. And what he's saying is, who do you see that I am? When he asked his disciples, they say, oh, some people see, they say that people don't really see you. What do you mean people don't see me? Some people say you're John the Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets, but they can't see you the way that you are. He says, I'll tell you why. If they can't see the cross, if they don't understand the cross, they'll never be able to see me. You say, what does that mean? You see, when Jesus is saying is that you can't see Christ. You think you see Christ, but if you look at Christ apart from him on the cross, and that pathway of, what does he say after? He says what? First he says, who do men say that I am? And then he goes on and says to his disciples, he says, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. He says, you want to see me clearly? It's only by the cross. It's only by taking that serious path with Christ. You see, what Christ is saying is that he's discovering that everybody has spiritual agnosia. nobody really sees Jesus. If you think you see Jesus, you don't see him until you say, the way to the cross is how you see Jesus. It's how you know him. It's how you can experience, again, miracles oozing through you. The power of God flowing through you. You say, okay, but that's not for me. The Christianity isn't for you, because that's what you were meant. Imagine God put his spirit in you for you just to go to confession once a month and that's your thing, that's it. God came, he took flesh, and he died on the cross, and he resurrected, and he ascended to heaven, he did all these things, he did miracles, so that you could just be washed every couple months, by confession, maybe go to take communion. That is not Christianity. The reason why we chose this topic is because unless you accept that I should die. I remember my spiritual father, his English wasn't the greatest, so he said, they used to call me Mikey. He said, what's your Mikey? He said, if you love the Lord, you should kill yourself. I'm like, sorry. He said, yes, you should kill yourself. Pass me the knife. I'm happy to do it. What he's trying to say is, if you love the Lord, you should lay down your life for him. You should kill yourself. Sorry. So I never talked to him again. No, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to rebrand death. That every time you feel like there is death in front of you, an opportunity to die to your own self and your own selfishness, there is an opportunity for life to flow, for something to be powerful in you, to overcome a temptation that you are struggling, to defeat some type of evil that is hurting your home, hurting your parents' marriage, or hurting your family or your friends. You want to overcome that evil, you need power. Where do you do it? You have to die. Do you need power in your home? You need power with your parents, or you need power with your friends? You need power with your temptations? You should kill yourself. You have to die. You have to say, okay, Lord, I'm going to go down this path. I'm afraid. But when God gives you the first sight of power, it's addicting. I'm telling you, every time the spiritual leader in Africa, every idea he had was nuts. I'm like, why can't we just do something normal? Why can't we just go sing a song or something? He's like, no. Everything was crazy because when you do things that are crazy for the Lord, he says that's when you experience the miracles of God. That's what I hope for you. I hope one day we can take you guys to a mission trip in Africa and you guys could see the power of God when you accept to die, not to be the lamb, to be strong for Christ. Say, I'm for Christ. I promise you, every time somebody goes on one of those mission trips, they come back and say, I'm ready to die for Christ. People decide, I'm going to live for... When I went, first time I came back, I said, I'm going to move to Africa. I'm going to be found. I got married and moved to Africa. Why? Because it's addicting. Jesus is addicting. The life that comes out of a life for Christ, it's addicting. You can't choose any other way. Every other life is cheap. I'm going to work 9 to 5, get a paycheck, go home, get a car. No, there's no value in it. But every day when you could say, I'm living and dying for Christ every day, and you could see the power of God, you'll see it. Glory be to God forever. Amen.